And there we are. We are live. Hi, everyone. Welcome to Off Script, project of the Blue Room podcast. My name is MaryAnn McKibben Dana, and I write at the Blue Room on Substack. In this series, we are having conversations with wonderful, diverse voices who come at this topic from different angles, which is how do we live in a world that is often set up for a certain kind of person? And those of us who fall outside of what the culture often calls the norm or normal, how do we find our way, and not just find our way, but build better systems, build better communities that really provide a place of belonging for all kinds of people. And when we talk about belonging, Amy Julia Becker is one of my go-tos. In fact, this series that we're in right now is going along with the book that just came out that I wrote that came out a month or two ago called Better Than Normal. And I quote you, Amy Julia, in the book. So we're really glad to have you with us. Thank you for joining us. And for those who are joining in real time, we're glad to have you with us too. This will be up later on the Blue Room and also on the podcast feed. But Amy Julia, just tell us a little about yourself, the work that you do, where people can find you online, in person. You're an author, you're a speaker, you have a Substack of your own, which is full of great wisdom. So tell us about yourself.
Well, thank you. Thank you for having me, first of all. Yeah. I was saying to you earlier, this is my first Substack Live, so this is fun to be able to do, and
Honored.
I really appreciate it. Yes. And yeah, I have been kind of writing and starting with a blog, almost 20 years ago when our daughter Penny was born. I was in seminary at the time at Princeton Seminary, so I was very much thinking about matters of faith. And I had a daughter with Down syndrome, our first daughter, and so our first child. And so I've been kind of writing, speaking, thinking about faith, family, and disability and culture. Like, how does all of this, what does it tell us about ourselves as humans, actually, for about 20 years now? And at this point, that means I've written, 4 or 5 books. I think I'm in the middle of writing the 5th official book. And some of those are very explicitly disability kind of memoir, and others go a little farther afield. But they're really all thinking about, what does it mean to know ourselves as beloved? What does it mean to be human in both our limitations and all the possibilities that are opened up to us? What does it mean for us to be connected to God, to ourselves, to one another? And I have gotten at that through lots of different ways. And as you said, I do have a podcast and a Substack called Reimagining the Good Life. So it really is this sense of like, maybe what we are being sold, which we literally are all the time by our entire society, is actually not what we need or want. Maybe there's another way forward. And I think sometimes I talk about that in very explicitly Christian terms, as far as like the way of Jesus, and the way of blessing that I think is offered to us through especially the words and teachings of Jesus. But then also, I think we can reimagine the good life without having to be explicitly faith-based, in terms of just so many people in our culture who are saying, this actually is not satisfying. This way of kind of always being Instagram ready and buying whatever I want to have immediately. It's not actually getting me what my soul is longing for. So those are some of the things that I write and speak and talk about. And
you speak to my condition, as the Quakers say. So we're really glad. I'm just so glad you're out there. Every time I see a new post, I'm like, great, this is going to feed me, and it's going to, as a mother of neurodivergent children, kids who have struggled with their mental health, in large part because of that difference, and how the structures in which they were asked to move as, a big school, academic excellence that looks a certain way of being in school all day long and then hours of homework at night. I mean, it just was not a good fit. And that was the source of so much of their distress. It was, it was an internal struggle, but it was reflecting an external reality, which is you fit this. And if you don't, you got to figure it out on your own. It's not incumbent on the system itself to change. You've got to you've got to work this out.
Yeah.
And I feel like a lot of the threads that you weave together are similar. And I want to tell you, Amy Julia, that I'd love to hear you talk about your continuum of belonging, from exclusion to belonging, and how you define those terms. I actually quote you in the book in my chapter on, I think, moving from comfort to courage, and the idea that we sometimes, either explicitly or not, want the world around us to kind of feel good for us.
Yeah.
And if that means someone else needs to struggle, well, that's kind of, we'll just maybe put on some denial and just say, well, my comfort matters. And if we can move into a courageous space and say, well, it's maybe not my preference or not built for me exactly to be a certain way, but this allows someone else to be fully here and to belong. That's a trade-off that's worth making. And that courage is important. So I do want to tell you before you run through it that people are still, the book is new in the world. So I'm still hearing from folks just trickling in of stories. And I've had more than one person say, the bit on belonging is my takeaway, which I'm both grateful for. And I'm like, that wasn't even mine. I was quoting somebody else, but I'll take it because I think it is such a well articulated. I think it goes from exclusion to tolerance to inclusion to belonging. So would you mind just kind of running through that?
Yeah, I'll totally unpack that. And, there are lots of different kind of similar formulations, and I think they're all helpful in similar ways, actually. And for me, I was actually just a long time ago was asked to teach a group of fourth graders about belonging. And so that's where this came from, was just like, okay. And I started with actually getting a couple of them to volunteer to play a game together. And I asked two of them, I said, okay, you're playing a game where you just are bouncing a ball on the floor and the other person catches it. And I want you to show me using your game. I'm bringing a third person volunteer up here. How do you exclude her? And they were like, oh, easy. We tell her to go away. Like, we keep playing our game. Okay, great. So that was exclusion. We don't want you here. And then I said, okay, how about if you were just to tolerate her being here? And they said, well, she could just stand there and we would continue to play the game. So again, you're happy to be here. You're welcome to be here as long as it doesn't bother us. And then I said, well, what if you wanted to include her in the game? And they said, okay, we would just invite her to come and play. And so again, they're playing the same game and she just gets to be a part of it. And I said, well, what if for whatever reason she was not able to play the game that you were playing, but you still wanted her to be a part of what you were doing? And they were kind of like, I don't really know the answer here. And I said, just think about it for a minute. And one of them goes, oh, we would change the game. And so they sat down on the floor and they rolled the ball to each other as a way to essentially modify the game to include the person who wasn't able, for whatever reason, to participate in the same way as they were. And it was just this kind of beautiful moment with these girls. But it also, I think, spoke to me. And again, if you look in like kind of official definitions of inclusion, it would encompass what I was just talking about with belonging. When we talk about like diversity, equity, and inclusion, which I know can be kind of negative buzzwords for some people, at the same time, that idea is not let's include only people like us, or let's include you if you can play my game the way I'm playing it. But the intention has to be, we want to include you come what may. Even if that means that we are changing who we are in order for that, or how we are structured in order for that to happen. And I think that's what sometimes gets lost when we think about inclusion. I know for me, as a mother of a child with a disability, my attitude for a long time was, how can I break down barriers so that Penny can come in and be like me? I wanted to include her, and I wanted her to be included in my relatively homogenous world, rather than saying, what does it mean for us to give and receive from one another transformatively so that it changes me and it changes you? And that to me seems like a more robust understanding of belonging and of community. So again, it's kind of exclusion, tolerance, inclusion, belonging in this way of saying, what would it mean for us to actually believe enough in the relationships that we might have with each other that we would allow ourselves to be changed by each other, and the structures and systems that kind of put us here to do the same.
Yeah. That's so beautiful. And I love that. I love that example, and truly out of the mouths of babes, right? that these you gave them a problem to solve, right? You didn't give them the format. Maybe they taught you as much as you taught them, because you really could see it kind of crystallize in their mind, which then clarifies something that you've known and been working on. This is part of your life's work, but to see it so explicitly expressed is so beautiful. And I appreciate what you say about the language, because sometimes, I mean, it's all in the definitions of how we define these words, right? But what I love about including belonging, and there are secular places where that word is at work, but for me, theologically, it's an important word to have in that continuum, because, and I think the way you put it in a couple of things I've written of yours is belonging is really, we are not ourselves without you. Like we are not complete without you, your gifts, the ways that we each accommodate one another. And I think that it has a theological and a spiritual dimension. And again, it's not explicitly Christian, but for those of us who do live in that tradition, this is 1 Corinthians, the body of Christ, which they're all different parts, and they work together and they need one another. Right. So I love that framing for thinking about that.
That you quoting me back to me was actually me quoting Eric Carter, who is a researcher now down at Baylor University. And he, at least, is the first person I heard say, belonging is, we aren't us without you.
That's perfect.
And I've talked with him a lot about this topic as well. And I think that sense of being both needed and needy. Some of us know that we are needed by others, but we don't know that we are needy and deserving of care, right? Others of us, it's kind of the opposite, where all people see as our needs. They don't see the ways that we have something to offer. And when we get into communities of belonging, I think that's where that starts to happen. One of the things Eric and I also talked about is just that homogenous communities, like you can belong literally to a country club and be with often lots of people who almost the criteria for membership is that we're a lot like each other, and we're not thinking about you're from comfort to courage. We are not going to have courageous conversations. We are going to be comfortable together, so I think we have to be a little bit careful about, again, the definitions and what we mean, but where belonging is going to actually be both. There should be some measure of both comfort and discomfort in that experience of belonging. And maybe it's instead of comfort and discomfort, comfort and courage, in terms of being willing to be, changed and challenged by the encounter with the others who are there.
For the ultimate hope of growth, right? Growth together and growth as an individual when you're completely comfortable. And this is something we struggled with a lot, because when our kids were dealing with a lot of anxiety, one of the ways to kind of help them deal with it is through distress tolerance, like, doing a little bit more than you're comfortable with, and you grow your capacity. And even that also has its perils for people who are neurodivergent, because if you're autistic, for example, there really isn't, you're limited in how much you can grow beyond your basic tolerance. I mean, your neurological kind of workup is so different, right? And so accommodation is needed. And I want to shout out something else that you have offered into the world recently, which was I don't know if it was new to me, but the one about design with the professor from, where was she from? Sarah Hendren. She's a professor now at Northeastern University. Okay. She was at Olin College, which is a design school. Okay. And she wrote a book in 2020 that, again, anyone who's interested in these topics might enjoy. It's called What Can a Body Do? And it is looking at these different design questions, kind of adaptive design questions, at everything from the very small individual human level to our communal spaces and beyond, in the sense that she goes to Gallaudet University down in Washington, D.C. to see how do you design for deaf
students to be communicating with each other. It's different than you might for those of us who are hearing. And then similarly, if someone who has ALS, how can you design tools and fit this body in a way that is both creative and, again, like allowing and expecting engagement with other people and with the world? So, yeah, she's really, I think, incredibly thoughtful and helpful on those topics.
Yeah, I'll include a link to that podcast in the show notes for this. What brought it to mind just now is something you said. Triggered a memory of you all talking about independence and interdependence and dependence, I think, too, and here's where we're also pushing against this American, though not uniquely American, it's present in other places too, but like, I can do this on my own. And I will say, without getting into too many specifics, that like, my siblings and I, we have a mother who's very vibrant and very living independently, but we just had a conversation with her recently that independence comes with interdependence of communicating what do you need, trusting that we will be there for you, and also allow you the freedom and agency to make decisions for yourself as long as you feel like you can. And I wondered if you talk a little bit about that kind of independence, interdependence, either how you all talked about it in the podcast or just what comes to your mind today about that.
Yeah, I mean, one thing, Sarah mentions in that podcast is she and I share having children with Down syndrome. And so we think a lot because there's such a emphasis in the disability world on like living independently. And I think that is even language that I've become, I don't know, less comfortable with, I guess. And one of the things I think I said on that podcast, and I say regularly, is like, I have never lived independently. I've actually always lived in a family unit. Like just this afternoon, I was trying to put books back up on shelves, and sure, I could have gotten a stool for myself and done this, but my son was there and he's 8 inches taller than I am. And I was like, oh, will you do this for me? And it's like, yes, I will. And that's this teeny example of something that is happening all day long. And even for those of us who live alone in a dwelling place, we are still living interdependently, whether that's because there's somebody who like has, provided water for the water company, or because we've gone to a grocery store and someone's offered food. There's just so much interdependence in our lives. And I do think, of course, we want people to live into the agency and ability to make decisions for themselves when they're able to do so safely. We want to respect that kind of human autonomy and authority. And yet, one of the things we are also in is this age of like hyper individualism. I heard Ezra Klein the other day call it late stage individualism, because we're starting to realize this is not actually who we want to be or how we want to do it. It's harming us. And so I think I'm just trying to reclaim or claim, I don't know, some idea of not these other people, these disabled people or these elderly people or these children, which is, those are the people we think of as being dependent. And it's like, what if we're all dependent on each other? Actually, another podcast conversation I really enjoyed was with Leah Labresco-Sargent, who has written a book called The Dignity of Dependence. And saying we have this like idea that the norm is like essentially a single white guy in his late 20s who has no health conditions, who can do most things for himself, or at least feel like it's doing it for. And she's like, no, most of us, including that guy, do not actually live that way most of the time. Eventually, your back starts to hurt, or you have a wife who needs stuff and kids who demand things of you, and, all these real human relationships, which are both challenging and also ultimately really beautiful and life-giving, or at least they can be.
Yeah, that's so well said. Yeah. One of the things that I'm asking people in this series is, and people are coming at it from all kinds of different perspectives, but I'm curious, like, when sometimes for some of us who realize, oh, we're living in a different world than we thought in terms of a sudden illness or a depression, a child with a disability, like, was this something that kind of came to you suddenly? You're like, I'm living in a different, like, this is different than I expected. Or was it more of a slow kind of process of realizing? And I don't know if you came in with expectations of like, this is how my life will go. I'll have kids and it'll look a certain way. Just wondered if you'd reflect on that a little bit.
Sure. I didn't know how many expectations I had about what my life would be like and how it would go until, and we were told that Penny probably had Down syndrome a few hours after she was born. So did not know during pregnancy, just based on some decisions we had made around prenatal testing, and we're very surprised. And I really did not understand how much I had brought with me, literally, like, as you know, it's like I put my Vera Bradley tote bag on my shoulder, and along with it was the picture of our family and what that would be, and so that was, it felt very sudden and very shocking. And I would say that I had all of these. I also had stereotypes, misguided understandings of what it meant to be a family with a child with Down syndrome. So it was like, on the one hand, I didn't know how many expectations I had that we would be a very typical family, whatever that might mean. On the other hand, I then thought I knew what it was like, and I thought it was like bad and sad, essentially, to be a family who had a child with Down syndrome. And I was wrong about that too. So right. So I think I realized pretty quickly that we were not going to have the family that I expected, but it was a much slower understanding of what family we would have and what would be both challenging and beautiful about that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, the title of this series, Off Script, relates to the subtitle of the book, which is Virtues for an Off Script Life. And as you're talking, I'm realizing that we do come into certain experiences with expectations. Kate Bowler has written about this so beautifully with her own journey of like, but I just got my career settled. How can I have stage 4 cancer? I mean, it just doesn't make sense. There's this cognitive thing. And as you're talking, I'm realizing that like once we realize, okay, the norm, whatever that is not where I'm living anymore. But then there are alternate scripts that we sometimes get handed or assume that, well, this is just going to be a kind of a sad sort of thing to endure, when that script doesn't work either. Like maybe we just need to throw out the script, right? go full on improvisation here, which is another pet topic of mine. But yeah.
Yeah, I do think for us, and that's happened at multiple points along the way, in part because when it comes to disability, and this is probably true for other identities and, groups of people as well right now, there is a degree to which we are writing the script. Like Penny is 20 years old and she really wants to go to college, like to live in a dorm and be in a residential environment. And when she was born, that was not really possible. Like it didn't really, there were maybe like, a handful of places that offered programs like that were not even known about. Whereas now it's like, there's a whole organization called Think College for students like Penny who have intellectual disabilities and want to be able to go to have a somewhat typical college experience among peers. So it's like that literally, there was no script for that. It's still written. And that's true in like lots of different, I think, ways when it comes to disability and when it comes to some of these other things. And that's where that whole idea for me, my podcast and Substack are called Reimagining the Good Life. Like that has been our work as parents has been like, okay, how can we imagine, and I don't mean fantasize, but like kind of cast a vision for the future. And because when we cast that vision, like neurologically, what's happening is we begin to live into it, right? And if we can say, what if this could be good? Instead of taking the script from our culture that says, disability, and especially intellectual disability is like sad and bad, right? Like, well, what if we said it could be good and life-giving? Okay, what would we do then, So yes, it's been a lot of our experience as parents. And honestly, parents for our typical kids too, in the sense of, well, what if you don't have to be stressed out about homework all the time? And you could still work hard? What if you could get enough sleep? What if trying to, again, kind of imagine a different way of doing life in this
Yes.
world that is more based on a truth of belovedness and looking towards a world of belonging rather than a status hierarchy, competitive, consumerist melee.
Yes. Yes. And that's been one of my convictions as I write about this stuff, but also do a lot of speaking around it, is that those of us who do, for whom the norm, whatever that is, works on some level, even if the world as it is works well for you, we do this work on behalf of those for whom it does not. And yet it also is liberatory for all of us. Like,
Yeah.
As you just said, your more typical kids, just does the world need to be that way? Who wrote these rules? I saw something, maybe you saw it run across Substack a couple weeks ago, that was like, it's important to remember that we made this all up, like everything. I mean, money, the way school works, workplaces, everything is made up, which means, to your point about imagination, we can make up new things.
Yes.
And that's empowering, no matter what you bring to the table. I'm curious, Amy Julia, if there is you've written so poignantly about, you are in many ways looking on as you see the world and Penny interact with the world and the world interact with her, and places where that's been really beautiful, and also places that have just pierced your heart with that lack of belonging.
Yeah.
Are there values or practices, things that you fall back on when you hit those moments that help you or that have helped you along the way as you've parented her and moved through this?
I'd say there are two that come to mind. They're both kind of in the like contemplative practices realm. One is actually like learning what it means to receive my own belovedness, but also kind of, again, there's a passage there are a couple of passages in the Bible. I mean, there are plenty that talk about love, but they're really one in particular, I'm thinking of Ephesians 3, where Paul writes about being rooted and established in love. And so to me, that's always kind of gets my imagination going about like, okay, being like a tree where there's like nourishment coming from love rather than nourishment coming from fear or from anger or from hurt. And so I did have like a long season of really needing to like work on believing in belovedness for me, but also believing in like that love is the truest truth and the realest real thing. And so for me, that came from everything from like actually looking at, and I memorized that Ephesians 3 passage. But it also came from things like imagining myself in front of God and not coming with any of my achievements or awards or the children that I've brought into this world or the books that I've written, but literally just coming to God and in my imagination, like as a father, and just being invited up onto his lap, like, no, you just get to sit here and be held. Mm-hmm. That's it. Mm-hmm. So a practice of kind of belovedness has been really helpful to me in reframing, reimagining, all of those things. The other thing recently, I've just found myself, I'm working on a book, and one of the premises of the book is to start with delight instead of deficit when thinking about your, in this case, particularly your children with disability, because so much of the world says, think about the ways that they need to improve and the things that are wrong with them. Mm-hmm. So what would it look like to start with delight? But I found that I was being really very habituated and able to do that when it comes to Penny. But with other people in my life, I can get very grumpy and demanding. And so I was like, oh, okay, what if I started with delight with myself when I'm mad at myself for whatever thing? What if I started with delight when I'm thinking about the fact that my son didn't empty the dishwasher or whatever? And that I've been thinking about the discipline of delight. Of like when I'm in that place of grumpiness or of again, fear, anger, hurt. It's not to say I can just get rid of those negative feelings with some toxic positivity. But at the same time,
Right.
can I pause for a minute and ask, is there anything that I can delight in about this person, about this situation? Is there anything I can give thanks for? And it kind of puts the other feelings in their proper place. And so those are two of the things, just that idea of kind of like believing belovedness and having some practices around that, and starting with delight or a discipline of delight. Those are some that have been, helpful for me.
That's so beautiful. And I love, there probably are people who would bristle at the idea of delight as a discipline, because discipline so often has this negative, like pejorative thing of like, it's something we have to work at. Yeah. But we do. I mean, it's something, if we habituate that, we will start to see things differently. This is a very small example, but as you were talking, I was thinking about one of my kids who, they have never, when they come in and take off their shoes, especially when they were little, they would end up in two completely different parts of the house. Like the left shoe is in the front entryway and the right shoe is like in the dining room. And it's like, how does that happen? Right. But it is a quirk of their brain and their creative self coming in and just sort of laying it all out. Right. And I don't, you're a mom, I'm a mom. We both have 3 kids, I think. Is that right? Yep. You have 3? Yep. Yeah. That's a lot to manage in your household. And so I can't say that I was always delighted to be like, where is the other shoe?
Seriously.
Yes. To leave. Right. And also, as I have matured as a parent and really grown, I think, in my own faith with that, is to say, there will come a time when there will be that kid will have no shoes in my house. And so I'm going to delight in that to the extent that I can right now. Don't always pull that off, but I do think you're right. It's a conscious choice that we can make to start there. Yeah. And don't feel like we need to end there if there's also grief and stuff to work through. Your point about toxic positivity is very well taken. Good. Well, last question for you is, what would you say to someone who is in that space right now of realizing this is not what I thought, either with themselves or with a loved one, and they're moving to keep the theme going off script and maybe need to write their own? What do you say to folks who are in that kind of gap, who they are, who they're expected to be, and all of that?
I do think so much of it is this sense of like, my last book was called To Be Made Well, and it came out in 2022, so a long time ago now. But when I started speaking about that book, this is something that's not even in the book, but I said, it's really like honesty, humility, and hope are what lead to healing. And I do think that when you're in that gap, what's really often happening is that there's a lot of uncertainty. There's often a lot of grief over what you thought you were going to have and you don't. And then sometimes there's guilt because you feel like you shouldn't be grieving that thing. Like I felt really guilty about grieving the child I wasn't given, that right. I didn't want to see that I wanted a typical child. Like I didn't want to know that about myself, but I also needed to honor the fact that that was true. And I needed to grieve and to get through that process. But all of that just really does take time. And so that sense of like gentleness and care for ourselves, I think is really, really important. So being like going to that like raw, honest kind of, for me, I talked about it as ugly grief, like, because sometimes our grief is beautiful because we're like grieving a real human being who has died, and we need to say like, that is totally grievous. And there's a holiness to that. Sometimes it's like, oh my gosh, I can't believe that I'm grieving that. Like, that's so terrible about me. And it still needs to be grieved. Like there's an honesty there. And then the humility part is like asking for help. And finding the people who are not judging you for feeling the way you're feeling, but who at the same time might be able, whether that's to pray for you or to just walk beside you or to listen to you as you talk things through. Or, I remember my mom, when Penny was first born, would come to our house and she would say, you can either go and sleep or you can go and write in your journal, because she knew that like those were the things for me that were going to help me actually get through this really challenging time. So honesty, humility, and then hope is again, that sense of, having a spiritual imagination that leads away from where I am exactly right now. And I do think those things together, honesty, humility, and hope, kind of can build. And the reason I'm making this circle is that they don't go in a straight line. Like, it's not like up and to the right, now I'm all done, because often, especially with a child with a disability, like, you go through this process and then, oh, and now she's in middle school, and the friendship piece is different than I expected and harder than I thought. And I'm going to have another, but I do see it as like almost like a spiraling upward. Like, you're going back to what feels like the same place, but you've learned some stuff. And so
Absolutely.
there's movement that's happening. So yeah, so those are, I mean, I could say more, but those are some thoughts on if you're in that place of just being really gentle and patient with yourself, but also honest about where the feelings are coming from, getting other people involved who are trusted, and moving towards hope.
Right. Thank you. That's beautiful. I will take that to the bank. That is good stuff there, Amy Julia. Well, Amy Julia Becker, we're so grateful to have you with us on Off Script, and thank you for the work that you're doing. Remind folks where they can find you.
Yeah, so here at Substack, you can look up my name or Reimagining the Good Life, and then I have a website, amyjuliabecker.com, and it has all the books and podcasts and social media handles and all the things.
Well, congratulations on all that work, and best to you as you close in on the next manuscript that is hopefully finishing up.
Yes.
You have lots of peaceful writing times to bring all that to a close. And thank you again for your presence, for your work in the world, and grateful for you. And those of you who joined us, thanks for being with us, and we will see you again. Take care, everyone. Bye.